Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to share how to use holiday stamps for other seasons. In this case, I'm using the Heaven and Nature stamp set from Pajama Crafter Stamps. I'm first going to do a holiday card with it, and then I'm going to change it up and create one that could be for, say, spring or summer. So I'm going to take my stamp out. I'm going to set that die to the side. I'll use it in just a little bit. The very first thing that I love to do anytime I get a new clear stamp set is use a white eraser over the stamping surface. It removes any possible manufacturing residue and helps to take the ink just a little bit better. Then I use a soft brush to remove any of those eraser bits that are left there. And we have a clean stamp ready to take some ink. So I'm going to use my Misti stamping tool to stamp these images. I'm stamping them on Hammermill Cardstock, and I'm using some Tuxedo black Memento ink. I'm going to be coloring with Copics for the images for both of these cards. So I like to use the black Memento ink when I'm coloring with my Copic markers. So by using the Misti stamping tool, I can stamp multiple times and make sure that I have a nice, clean, crisp image to do my coloring. And I'm actually going to do this on two different pieces of cardstock because I'm going to use those coordinating dies and die cut that cardinal as well as the poinsettia out, and then I will layer it onto the piece that's going to be on my card with some foam tape so that it has a little bit of extra dimension to it. The dies that come with this cut out the entire image or the cardinal or the poinsettia, so you have a few different options on using this set. First, I'm going to clean my stamp off. It's just dye-based ink, that black Memento, so it cleans off with just a damp cloth. For the first two colors, I'm using 100, which is black, as well as C7, and I'm just going to color the beak of the cardinal, doing it with the C7 first, adding just a touch of that black. If you use too much of the black, it just completely covers the lines and the detail of the stamp set, and we don't want to do that. Next, I'm going to be doing the reds of the cardinal. So I have R22, R27, and R29 here. I'm actually going to ditch the R27 because it needs to be refilled, and I didn't realize that until I started coloring with it. So I'm going to go in with the R22, which is this pinky peachy color. And then I'm going to be doing the darker details with the R29. Now for the images for this card here, I'm using two colors per area. You can, if you want some deeper shading, use 3 colors, but I wanted to keep it a little bit simpler. When it comes to my second card, coloring the flower, I will be using 3 shades of the same color. So you'll see coloring with that. It's just a tiny bit different. It's not a whole lot different, but just a tiny bit different. So when I'm coloring with Copics, I always color with the lighter color first, go in with the darker color to do some of the detail pieces, and then I go back in with the lighter color to blend those two colors together. If you're using 3 different colors, you would do the light, the medium, the dark, and then go back to the medium, blending between the medium and dark, and then go back to the light, blending everything out. So when I'm coloring the cardinal here, instead of using full brush strokes, I'm kind of flicking my pen and flicking the color. Where I want the color darkest, I'm starting, and then I kind of flick up so that there's less ink where I want it to blend into the lighter color. I just find that it's a little bit easier for this. I do this with flowers as well as the cardinal or birds. When I'm doing other things, I don't necessarily make it do that kind of stroke with my pen, but for these, that's what I like to do. So once I'm done going back in with the light color to blend it, sometimes I'll go back with that darker color because I'll find that there's some other areas that need a little bit or need darkening. In this case, I'm grabbing that C7 as well as C5 and just doing the coloring right around the eye of the cardinal. Again, I don't want it to be too dark. Now, I'm using the cool grays, which are the Cs. You can also choose warm grays from Copic, which have a tiny bit of brown in them, and then there's also toner grays. Now, I'm using Copics because they're my favorite alcohol marker. They're the ones I've had these for like 20 some years. I know there's a lot of other brand of alcohol markers on the market. You can swap those for similar colors in your favorite brand of alcohol marker. I've tried the odd other one over the years, and these have just remained my favorite, probably because they're the ones that I'm most comfortable with, the ones that I have experience with, the ones that I use most often. But again, These are alcohol-based markers. You can swap them with your favorite alternative if you don't have Copic or if you prefer a different brand. And of course, you can always choose an alternate method of coloring as well. I love coloring with Copics because you can color that same area forever and it doesn't start to pill the paper. Whereas if you use, say, dye markers, that paper starts to pill really quickly and easily. And then by blending in, you don't get the streak marks from your marker either. So it is one of my favorite ways of coloring. I don't do it super often because it does take a little while longer, as well as the fact that there is a bit of a learning curve to it, but I do find it fairly zen. So for the greens, I'm using YG63 and YG67. For the first image here, I'm only coloring that cardinal and that poinsettia. Those are the ones that are being die cut. When it comes to the second image, though, that one I will color the whole image because that one is going to be the background piece for my card. So again, with the greens, I start with that light color. I go in with the darker color and then back with that lighter color and blend it out. I'm using some Y08 in the center of the poinsettia. I am going to cover it with some stickles later on, so we're really not going to see that color, but I did want to make sure there was a lighter base layer between there or beneath there. For this second image, when it comes to that cardinal and poinsettia, I'm not going to color it fully with all of the blending and that detail. I am going to do a base layer of that lighter color simply because we are putting the other image on top, the die cut image on top, and we don't need to spend the time or the ink to do all of that blending. But I do want some color there because it is going to be raised from the base image. So if you tilt it to the side, I want to see some color below there. If it's not your cup of tea to do that, you don't have to. It's my personal preference. I just like seeing that something's colored underneath there rather than it being blank. So I'm just coloring with the lightest color for each one of them, for both the poinsettia, the cardinal, as well as the leaves. And then I'm going in and I'm coloring the poinsettia behind that cardinal. So I'm going to do the same method for that poinsettia that I did for the other one. I start with the light color, the R22 first. Go in with the R29, flicking my brush, starting where I want it to be the darkest and flicking out. And then I will go back in with that R22 and blend those two colors together. And once again, if by chance, after blending them with the lighter color, I feel that it's lightened a bit too much, I go back in with that darker color. And when you are coloring with those Copics, the ink stays wet for just a little while and those inks continue to blend together while they are dry. And we're all our own worst critic. So if by chance you're not loving what you are doing, let it dry, step away from it for a while and then come back to it. And often it looks much better after it's dried and once you've stepped away from it than when you're coloring, because when we're coloring, we're so focused on it. We're typically fairly close to the image. So I always find that if I'm not super happy with something, I let it dry, set or walk away from it, and then come back. And usually it's not as bad as I was originally thinking. And because it's drying and evened out while it's drying, most of the time it looks much better after I've stepped away and I'm not looking at it so closely. So after working on that poinsettia, we can do a little bit of the greenery. I'm doing all of my greenery, those same two greens, but if you want to add some variety, you can add a variety of different greens. When I'm doing cards like this, especially for a video, I try to keep my palette to a minimum, if you will. I try not to use a whole bunch of different colors or like 1,000 different markers. So I try to keep it somewhat limited so it's not as overwhelming. So I do all of my greens in the same two colors. So I'm starting with that lighter YG63, going in and shading with that YG67, and then back in with the YG63. And this is one of my favorite green combinations to use, but again, obviously, if you prefer a more yellow green or say a darker, more evergreen, you can easily swap those out and change that up. So I love the fact that with coloring your own cards and whatnot, you can really customize it and change it up to suit your preferences. So there's a couple holly leaves right at the top of the lantern here. We're going to do those in that same green, starting with the lighter colors, going in with the darker ones. And again, just doing that little flicking motion. Typically when I'm doing it, I'm flicking either towards myself or away from myself. It's a little bit harder to do it to the left or the right and get a nice stroke that works with the curve of the leaves. So I typically will either move it or just flick that marker towards myself or away from myself. There's a couple berries with that holly leaf, or with those holly leaves, so I'm going to do those in the same colors as the poinsettia and the cardinal, the R22 and R29. When it comes to shading those, I do a little bit of shading all around the outside edge of those holly berries. One of them is behind a couple, so that one's going to get a little bit more shading than the ones that are more forward. I have the Y08, which is what I used in the center of the poinsettia, as well as YR04 for that candle flame. I'm going to do the Y08, the yellow first, and then add just a little bit of orange to the center of it, and then blend those two together. For my lantern, I'm using C3 and C5. So this is another set of cool grays. They're not quite as dark as what I was using on the beak and around the eye for the cardinal. I'm starting with the C1, coloring all of the areas underneath, and then I end up going over it with the C5. I want it to be just a little bit darker. Those areas are really, really narrow. I want to say like less than a 1/4 inch, probably just a little bit more than an 1/8 inch wide. So I don't need to do a whole lot of shading there. I don't find it's necessary because there's just so little area there. So that's why I end up going over and just coloring it with that C5. For the top part of the lantern, the little round hook that it hangs on, I do the shading where it goes behind the leaves or where it attaches to the base. For the top of the lantern, I'm going to do some shading right at the bottom of it as well as the sides. Then I'm going to come back in with that C3 and blend those together. So this is where I'm going over with that C5, covering the area underneath that I had colored in the C3 and just realized it was a little bit too light. It needed a little bit more darkness there. You could even take the C7 that was used in or for the area around the eye and use that if you wanted to add some shading below that lantern. I didn't find it was necessary. So after going in and doing the blending with that C3, I found that I lost some of the darkness from the C5. So I go right back in and just add a little bit more there. And once you have gone from the light to the dark to the light again and go back in with the dark, sometimes you need to blend it in and sometimes you don't really need to. Sometimes it starts blending itself out. So I do go in and just do it really, really lightly. For my candle, I'm just adding a little bit of C1. This is the lightest of the grays. There's barely any color there, but I wanted to add just a little bit of shadow in some areas of the candle. I don't color the whole thing, just below where that drippy wax is, where that candle goes behind the poinsettia, and right where the wick attaches to the candle. And I also use that gray on the berries to the right, just to give them a little bit of a color variation from the background. For just a touch of sparkle, I'm using a Stardust gel pen for on top of those berries and the areas on that candle where I colored it with that gray. Again, I don't want to color the whole thing, but it's just going to add a little bit of shimmer, something that's going to catch the light when you tilt the card. So with my images done, I'm using a pair of die snips. I don't know who makes these. I got these years and years ago. I'm cutting my dies apart. When you cut the dies apart, there's a tiny little strips of metal. I cut them apart or out of the larger one, and then the rest of that little tiny tab of metal, I cut it right over the garbage can. When you cut them, they often will fly in whatever direction, and we don't want a little shard of metal somewhere in our craft room, so I just do it right over top of the garbage can so that little shard goes right into the garbage can and I don't have to worry about finding it later. For the dies, I match them onto the image and then use a little bit of Best Ever Craft tape to tape those in place to make sure they're not going to shift on me while I'm doing my die cutting. Now, when you die cut with the dies, it adds just a tiny little halo of white around that image. When it comes time to gluing them on top of our other images, I am going to color some of the areas of that white halo, but I want to wait until it's on top of my image to see exactly what areas need to be colored, because not all of it does. Then I use the die for the cardinal and cut that one. You can't do the poinsettia and the cardinal at the same time because the dies overlap, and you never want dies overlapping each other going through a die cutting machine. That's the quickest way to ruin them. So we do those separate, set those to the side. I trimmed down my image piece here to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And one way that I love to cheat layers on pieces that I use Copic markers on is I use the chisel end of my Copic marker and go on the outside of that cardstock. It makes it look like you have a really thin mat below it, but you don't. You just use the marker, and you know it's going to coordinate perfectly with your image because it is the colors that you use to color your image. So I chose the R29 to do this. I could have easily also done the YG67, the green, if you wanted green around it instead. Now, when I'm creating cards, I love finding ways to add extra texture and dimension to my images, to my die cuts. One of the ways I do that is with Glossy Accents and stickles. So I'm using some Glossy Accents on the flame of the candle, on the berries, as well as the eye of the cardinal. And then I use some platinum stickles on the center of the poinsettia. So it gives it a little bit of extra texture as well as shine and sparkle. And I just think it takes it to the next level. For my card base, I'm going to create an easel card with this image. So I start off with a piece of cardstock that is 8.5 by 11, cut it down the center so that I have a piece that is 4.25 by 11. Then I am using my Scor-Pal to score it at the 5.5 inch mark and then at the 2.75 inch mark. So my particular Scor-Pal doesn't have a groove at the 2.75 inch mark. So I just moved the edge of the cardstock up to the 1/4 inch and then scored at the 3 inches. So when you slide it back down, that score line will be at the 2.75 inch mark. So this is a super simple card base that just changes it up just a little bit to something a little bit non-traditional, but is so easy to do. So for the inside of my card, I want to use one of the sentiments on that inside. I also need to use it on a strip of paper. When you put that easel card up, you need something for the edge of that cardstock to sit on so that it sits nicely. So this little strip of paper is going to do that. Now I'm using just a single strip. You could double it up if you wanted it to be a little bit thicker. I find that one layer is fine as long as you're not touching it and moving it around. But if you do want it to be a little bit more secure, you can just do a double layer of that cardstock. So I have some Cranberry Cardstock. This is just a scrap that I have. I used a little bit of embossing powder tool on it and then stamped it with some VersaMark ink for that sentiment. And I'm embossing it with some gold embossing powder. So that's going to tie in nicely with the platinum stickles that I put on the inside of the poinsettia, as well as it just works well for Christmas or holiday cards. So use my heat tool to emboss that. And when I did that stamping of it, because this strip of cardstock is wider than my card, I did lay my card in my Misti stamping tool to make sure that I was centering that sentiment within that strip. Once I've trimmed it down to 4.25 inches in length, I'm making it a little bit narrower because I realized that that strip wasn't an exact it was just a little bit off. One side was a little bit wider than the other, so I wanted to make sure that it was nice and even. With that trimmed down, I can start assembling my card. So at this point, I have let my stickles and my Glossy Accents completely dry. You don't want to wait or you don't want to do this step while they're still wet. I just use the glue on the bottom scored part of that card base. We don't want to glue it over the whole front because otherwise we're not going to have our easel. So we're only attaching it to that bottom scored part, the 2.75 inch part, making sure to leave the glue just a little bit away from the edge so that we have a little bit of a mat there. I'm using some foam pop dots on the cardinal as well as that poinsettia. These are thin foam pop dots, so they're not going to raise it a whole lot, but just enough so that it gives it some extra dimension to it. So I am putting that easel up exactly how I want it to go, so I know that when that piece is laid or rested against that strip of cardstock, that it's sitting how I want it to be sitting once I'm done. It's always easy to know exactly how it's going to lay when you do it that way, when you attach the image to the front first and then you add the strip on the inside, making sure that it's exactly how you want it to go. Take the backing off of my foam tape and then I can attach the cardinal as well as the poinsettia. So this is where you start to see the halo around those images. So I'm just going to use the marker that coordinates with the color on the outside. So for the cardinal, I'm doing the shading color that was done on the poinsettia. that is behind it using that same color. For the leaves, I'm using the darker of the two. That's the color that would be closest to the poinsettia and the cardinal. And then there is the gray of the lantern right behind the cardinal as well as the poinsettia as well. There are the lines from the image. When you cut these out, you see a little bit of that, so that definitely helps for lining everything up, but the image just looks so much better after filling in those little white spaces. You can see how it made the whole image kind of feel like it was done. I don't mind the white halos when it's all the way around and it shows up in front of, say, a printed background or something like that, but when it's something like this where some of it is colored and some is not, I prefer to color that outside edge. So for my second card, I have some of my image here already colored. These are the pieces that are exactly the same as that first card. So my lantern is done, my greenery is done. I'm adding some YOO to the inside of the lantern. I thought it'd be nice if it had a little bit of a yellow glow to it. This marker, I realized halfway through coloring that it is dry as well. I need to go refill that one. I don't have a refill for this color though, so I have to get one. So once that is colored, we're going to start working on our bird and our flower, but they're no longer a cardinal or a poinsettia. One of my favorite ways to change up a holiday cardinal is to turn it into a blue jay. So I have 3 markers there. Again, I end up taking one out because it needs to be refilled. I should have checked this ahead of time, but I didn't. So I'm starting with B32. This is actually the lighter color. And then I'm going to be doing my shading with B24. So anytime I have holiday or certain seasonal products, I try to look at shapes that are in them to see if they can easily be swapped. So a cardinal and a blue jay are somewhat similar shapes, so it's really easy to just color them in different colors to create something totally different, and it just expands how long you can use your products for. It's always great to be able to use them for a different season other than what they were intended. Now, in a perfect world, I wouldn't have holly on the lantern. However, holly grows all throughout the year. We have several holly bushes in our yard. And then the berries, I probably would prefer they didn't have berries on them, only because it makes it look a little bit more holiday-ish, although our bushes, the one that has berries on it, has berries throughout the summer. So it's not something that doesn't exist in the summer. It's just more associated with Christmas. However, fun fact, did you know that holly actually has not the spiky leaves? The spiky leaves only grow where animals nibble on it. And I have proven that by looking at our holly bushes. We have deer through our yard regularly, and the only area on our holly tree where it has those spiky leaves is the level where the deer nibble at them, which I thought was really interesting. Something I never knew until I saw that fun fact and then checked our bushes and realized that that's absolutely true. They have just kind of regular rounded leaves until animals nibble on them. It's a protection feature for them. I just thought that was the most fascinating thing. Anyways, back to our image. So rather than our flower be a poinsettia, I thought the shape of it, why not turn it into a clematis? Or you could just pick whatever flower you want that is a similar shape to what you're doing. But to me, this looked fairly similar to what a clematis would look like. So you could really get really creative with the colors because those come in a bunch of different colors. I chose to do some purples. So I'm using V12, V15, and V17. So I'm starting off with the V12. Then I'm going in with the V15. I forgot to show the camera ahead of time, so here I am doing it now. So the 15 is the middle color. So when it comes to coloring with 3 different colors, like I said before, I do the light, the medium color, then the dark color. Then I go back with the medium, blending just between that medium and dark, and then go in with the lighter. Now, when it comes to coloring flowers, the flower behind the blue jay, I will do the 3 colors, but I'm just going to be coloring it the light, medium, dark, medium. When it comes to the other clematis flower, the petals towards the back are going to be heavier with the 2 darker colors, with the medium and dark color, little tiny bit of the lighter color around the edges. And then when it comes to the petals that are closer to the foreground, those ones will be more lighter. or more focused with the light and medium. I'll do a little bit of the darkest color in the center, but I try to make the petals towards the back a little bit darker, the petals towards the front a little bit lighter. So once we go in with that medium color to do the shading, I go back in with the darker color, but I don't go quite as far as I did with the medium color. Now, this is the way that I learned how to color with Copics: light, dark, light, or light, medium, dark, light. I know there are people out there that just go from the dark color to the light color, and this is the way I've always done it. This is the way I'm most comfortable doing it, but I do suggest that you try both and see which way works best for you. One way isn't the best for everyone, so it's always great to find different ways of doing things, try them both, and see which way you prefer doing it yourself. And I'm doing the clematis behind the blue jay as well as the one that I'm coloring right now, the same color, but you could also change the colors up on them. You could do one pink and one purple, or add other colors to it. So especially when flowers have a large variety of different colors, you can really get creative with which ones you use for the design that you're creating, which one works better with it, that sort of thing. So after doing that first one, now I'm working on the second poinsettia. So I am going to be heavier towards the back. I do my strokes the same as when I was doing it as a poinsettia. So I do little kind of flicks with my marker, making sure that the darker one doesn't go quite out as far as the medium shade. And then when it comes to blending them, I blend them the same way, but I am heavier on the background petals with the color than I am on the foreground petals. So when you're coloring Copic markers, often the color actually goes right through the cardstock. I should have mentioned this earlier. That's why I'm working on a scrap piece of paper, because if it goes all the way through and then it goes onto the surface you're coloring on, say here I have a glass surface and that color dries, if you're working on a different color, sometimes that will rehydrate with that different color and pull up a different color than what you're intending or what you're doing. So by working on some scrap cardstock or scrap paper, this is just printer paper, if anything goes all the way through, it goes right into that paper and I can see that and I start to avoid those areas. So just like the first poinsettia, I put Y08 in the center of my clematis. I'm also using that Stardust gel pen to add a little bit of shimmer to the candle as well as the berries. Now I did my berries on the right side, the same purple as the clematis, just to have them a little different color from the first. And when it came to the holly, I was a little bit heavier with the pink this time than I was with the red. I didn't want a whole lot of red on there, so I just kept it more pink than red. There's still some shading there, but I wasn't as heavy as I was with the holiday card. So just like before, we're going to die cut the clematis as well as our blue jay. We're doing them separate because we want to make sure that our dies don't overlap each other. So I, again, am using those same pieces of Best Ever Craft tape. I reuse those pieces probably about a half a dozen times. After about a half a dozen times, they don't really stick too well anymore. So then I will toss them to the side, or I'll toss them in the garbage. But you can get a lot of use out of them. They last a long time. So for this particular card, I thought it would be fun to make that candle light up, or the flame from the candle light up. So I'm using a one light from Pearblossom Press. These are so easy to use. I'm starting to create a playlist with all of the light up cards that I've created, or videos that have light up cards in them. So you'll be able to find all of the different cards with those light up features in that playlist. So I choose my one light, put that battery in there. There's a little plus sign on the battery as well as the little slot it slides into. You just make those match. I have the stamp set from Pearblossom Press that has all sorts of different stamps in there that say push, press, blow, that sort of thing. So I'm choosing the one that says push. I put that light on top of my image and then judged where the trigger, where the little button was going to be. And I wanted it to go on to the top of the lantern. So that's where I did the push stamp. I chose the one that was writing, the cursive one, because I wanted it to be just a little bit more subtle, and I just stamped it with that same black Memento ink. I'm using an X-Acto knife to die cut that little flame out of there. I have a little cutting mat below that. I don't want to cut onto my glass surface. So this is going to create an opening for that light. I'm going to do a top folding card here. So I have another piece of 4 1/4 by 11 cardstock. This time I'm only scoring it at the 5.5 inch mark, and then I am reinforcing that score. I put my image piece over my card base and use a pencil to outline where that flame is going to go. Then I put the battery pack or the light piece on there and trace around the outside edges. Now this stamp set comes with a die that will cut a flap for the back so that you can change the battery, and I hadn't realized exactly how to use it, so I haven't used it yet, but I watched one of the videos on Pearblossom Press channel just to see how someone else used it, figured out exactly how to make it work for these. So the one thing that I did make a mistake on though is this die set, it cuts 3 of the edges and 1 is just a fold. I put that fold towards the bottom and I should have put it towards the top, because when you open the card, then the fold kind of open, or the opening opens. I end up fixing it with a removable glue dot. But it would be better to switch that die around, flip it around so that that fold is at the top and the opening is at the bottom. You'll still be able to open it to change that battery if you need to, but it just won't open up when your card is open up. And this is at the point where I realized that I should have done it the other way. I used some score tape in order to tape that battery pack in place. And just like my first card, I'm using my Copic marker chisel end in order to add a faux mat around here. So for this one, I use that B24, the darkest of the blues. Now I go and I want to diffuse the light on my candle here. So I put a tiny piece of vellum over top of it, gluing that in place with some Barely Art glue. And then I use that Y08 Copic marker to make it yellow, just so that it has a yellow tone to it. Then I just lay that on top of my background there, just to make sure that I have everything positioned properly. When I'm doing these cards, I test more times than I really need to make sure everything's working, to make sure that my positioning is right. I'd rather find out in the middle of it that it's not quite right or whatnot before getting to a point where I can't fix it. So for the sentiment on this card, I'm using the Mix and Match Celebrations Sentiment stamp set. I think it would also look great with a die cut sentiment on here, but I chose to use this. I'm just going to stamp them with that black Memento ink. You could also stamp it and emboss it if you wanted to add a little bit of a metallic texture to your sentiment, or want to make them show just a little bit more. I'm using my Misti stamping tool in order to position them in place. And just like my original stamp set, the Heaven and Nature stamp set, I did use a white eraser to make sure that I removed any possible manufacturing residue so that it takes ink really, really well. Stamped it a couple times to make sure I had a nice, clean, crisp stamping. And then we are ready to start adding our image to our card base. Now, because the battery for our one light has some dimension to it, I need to use some foam tape. So I have some foam tape here. It's not quite thick enough, so I will be doing a double layer of that foam tape to accommodate for the thickness of that battery pack. You want to make sure that the tape that you use is thick enough to accommodate that. Otherwise, you're going to have a bulge in the center of your card, and that's not a nice look. So as I'm doing this, I am putting the piece of tape down, trimming it, taking the backing off, and then adding another layer right to it. Sometimes I do it this way. Sometimes I will go and do all of my tape first, and then I will add the second layer. It doesn't really matter. You get to the same result anyways. So I am putting my tape on my card background instead of my image piece. And the main reason I'm doing that is I want to make sure to avoid that little door opening. We don't want to accidentally put tape and tape it closed. So I want to make sure to avoid that area. I'm also making sure that my tape is a little bit in from the outside edge so that I have enough room around my image piece. So once I have all that tape in place, I can take all of those backing pieces off, put it to my card base. And this is where I was troubleshooting how to make that stay closed, because you can see that flap wants to stay open. So again, I just use a removable glue dot in order to tape that in place to make sure that that stays closed on me. Another option would be, I don't even know what they're called. You know, the things on the back of picture frames that hold the cardboard in the back in? Those things I think would be a great alternative as well. I haven't actually done that yet, so I do have to play around with that to see how well that would work. But you do want to make sure that your battery pack stays closed on the back there. So after doing that, we're ready to add our Blue Jay as well as our clematis to the front of the card. So again, I'm using those foam pop dots to make them pop out. If we have things on there that are going to be die cut out, why not add that extra dimension with some foam tape? So after putting that on there, I take the backing off, put it onto my image piece, and just like my last card, I'm going to use my Copic markers to color in the areas around. Again, that halo I think would look a lot better on something like a same color background, but when it has some colored images behind there, it just looks a little off. So by coloring it in, it just makes that image more cohesive, and it makes it all look proper. It makes it look like it's a finished card. So just like the first card, I'm picking the shading colors that were used on the images below it. Once I'm done coloring these in, I can add my glossy accents and stickles. So for the first card, I did it kind of halfway between the project because of the way my day was going. I knew it was going to have lots of time to dry before I was able to assemble my card. For this one, I just did it at the end once the card was done, then I let it completely dry. Either one of those will absolutely work properly. The main thing though is you want to let that card completely dry. The other thing is you want to do your die cutting before adding the stickles and glossy accents, because the pressure of the die cutting machine will change the surface of glossy accents. So better to wait till afterward. So here's our completed card, a top folding card that has that light up lantern. And because we changed that cardinal to a Blue Jay and our poinsettia to a clematis, this card will work throughout the year. And I love the fact that you can easily use it as a card throughout the year, rather than only reserving it for holiday cards. Again, always great to have seasonal items that can be used at other times of the year. It almost feels like magic when you're able to do that. So then we have our first card, the holiday one, that is the easel card with the sentiment embossed in the center. So both of them absolutely beautiful, but again, great when you can use seasonal products throughout the year and for other seasons. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.